Terraform might actually be one of the most misunderstood missions for Grey Knights, because if you play it like a normal army, you'll probably lose. And honestly, it's not because Grey Knights don't hit hard enough, it's usually deployment, staging, and committing way too early. For a lower unit count army that doesn't love standing around doing actions, Terraform can get awkward fast. So in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how I'd approach UKTC Round 1 Terraform Sweeping Engagement as a Grey Knights player. Hello and welcome back to Warpbane Tactics. Now, before we jump in, just like I've said in previous videos, I'm definitely not claiming to be the best 40k player in the world. This is just my take based on my games, tournament experience, what's worked for me, and how I personally approach these rounds as a Grey Knight player. Obviously, with 11th around the corner, this sort of thing might not be relevant forever, but with plenty of events still being played using the current UKTC pack, hopefully this still helps people heading into tournaments. This is also going to be the first video in a brand new series where we go through the current UKTC terrain and mission pack and talk about exactly how I'd approach each round as a Grey Knights player, looking at the terrain, the mission, deployment ideas, common mistakes, and how I'd actually try and win these games at the table. So with that said, let's get into it. Right, so let's get started with the mission itself. Now, if you haven't played this mission before, the way it works is actually pretty straightforward. From a shooting phase, units outside of your deployment zone can start an action on an objective marker. If that unit survives until the end of the turn and still control that objective, you terraform it. Then from battle round 2 onwards, you'll score your normal primary points for controlling objectives in your command phase, but you'll also score an extra point at the end of your turn for every objective marker you've terraformed. Now on paper, this actually sounds like a mission Grey Knights should be pretty decent at. We've got mobility, teleporting, flexible threats, and the ability to pressure multiple parts of the board. But this is where things can get a bit awkward. Grey Knights are a lower unit count army, and unlike some factions, we don't exactly love sacrificing expensive units to stand around doing actions. Every activation matters, every unit matters, and later in the game, you usually want everything fighting, staging, scoring, or applying pressure. And because of that, I actually think if we can terraform early, we probably should. The longer the game goes on, the more valuable every single unit becomes. So getting those actions done early can take a lot of pressure off later in the game. For me, Terraform is all about board control, safe objective play, and planning ahead. If you overcommit too early, expose your pressure pieces, or leave those Terraform actions too late, this mission can snowball against you very quickly. So before we even think about deployment, we still need to understand how this board actually wants to be played. So before we even place a model down, we need to understand how this board actually wants to be played. And for me, the biggest question of this layer of terrain is, where can I safely stage? Because if you look at these purple firing lanes, these are the areas where Grey Knights can disappear very quickly if you get too aggressive too early, especially into shooting armies, tank lists, or anything with really efficient long-range damage. Now, the good news is this board actually gives us some really solid staging options. This left-hand ruin here is fantastic for hiding pieces while still threatening the middle of the board. The central ruin is probably one of the most important pieces of the terrain on the table for us. It lets us pressure the center objective, threaten multiple angles, and stage safely without exposing ourselves too early. Then over on the right hand side, we've got another really nice pocket where we can pressure that flank while staying hidden. For Grey Knights, this mission isn't really about sprinting forward and trying to table somebody. It's about pressure. We want to make our opponent respect the threat of teleporting, Hallowed Beacon plays, and counter punches without actually committing until we're ready. Because the biggest mistake I see Grey Knight players make on Terraform is overcommitting too early, stepping into fire lanes, losing key pieces, and suddenly you're playing catch up from the rest of the game. So now that we understand the board, let's talk about how I'd actually deploy my army on this terrain. Right, so this is roughly how I'd look to deploy on this terrain. Now, just before the comments come from me, this is obviously opponent dependent, mission dependent, and list dependent. I'm definitely not saying this is the only correct way to deploy. This is just how I'd personally approach it with my Grey Knights. So starting off, we'll go for the strike squads. So if you've got two, it's quite handy. I usually run one. I normally stick in my home objective. I know I'm not utilising the scout, but it's good and I find it really beneficial if I always stick in my home objective, so I don't have to worry about it. Also, if we do have two, we can use one to go towards the center. This can help with air denial if you pull it a first turn, or we can terraform this early. Next up, I've got my 2 interceptors, which I like to run on both sides of the board. This one going for my natural expansion here, and then this one going for the enemy one, just to apply that pressure. Also, I can switch on Hallowed Ground early, because if I push up and push up onto this one here, shoot at everything else, and then move them back behind terrain, and this one's already on you anyway. This interceptor squad is safe, but obviously we've already turned Hallowed Ground on for this turn. Also, I've got the Razorbacks. I haven't actually used them before, but I think this is how I stage them. One go for here, or again, line of sight down this area with the last cannon, and then one here to apply pressure for our natural expansion, because this is our non-negotiable. We don't want the enemy having this in the game at all. And then my crow and purifiers, I'll put them back here, ready to be picked up usually, or if not, I can push them forward into this direction just to protect this expansion here. My Dread Knights, usually they're in the center of the board, that way I can go either way with them. This applies pressure depending where the enemy go, and just helps keep them off the objectives and gives me that extra support in shooting or in melee if I need to get somewhere, especially with the normal Dread Knights with advanced charge and shoot. I usually run one Grandmaster Dread Knight just in reserves, ready to come down as rapid ingress potential. And I find this really helpful just because sometimes we do need that extra support in different places. So yeah, that's how I would get the deployment done. So my pressure pieces are the Grandmaster in Dread Knight. My home objective usually is a strike squad. My counter punch usually I use for my crow and purifiers, and then my flexible threats then that I use is either deep strike or my Razorback interceptors on the side. Once deployment is sorted, what am I actually looking to do in this game? For me, Grey Knights usually win Terraform through pressure, movement, and forcing awkward decisions. I'm not really trying to sprint onto every objective turn 1 and start fighting in the middle straight away. Instead, I'm looking for a key few things. First up, Hallowed Beacon angles, or just deep strike angles. One of the strongest things Warpbane gives us is the ability to suddenly threaten areas of the board that the opponent thought was safe. And there's actually quite a nice trick, as we all know, because remember, purifiers create a 6-inch hallowed ground aura around themselves. So sometimes what we can actually do is deep strike purifier unit conservatively, more than 9 inches away, nice and safe, and effectively sort of bungee our pressure forward. That 6-inch aura suddenly creates new hallowed ground, and then later we can use Hallowed Beacon to bring another infantry unit in more than 6 inches away from the enemy instead of 9. And suddenly a flank that looked completely safe for your enemy doesn't feel quite so safe anymore. Even if you're not charging immediately, the pressure that creates can completely change how somebody positions. Second, weak flanks. Grey Knights are amazing at pushing poor positioning. If my opponent overloads one side of the board, I'm immediately asking myself, can I punish the other side? Can I pressure an objective? Can I force them to split their army up? Then there's mid-board control. On Terraform, you really don't want to completely lose control of the center, because suddenly you're struggling to score, struggling to terraform, and reacting instead of dictating the game. And finally, trading up. Grey Knights don't usually win by trading evenly. If I'm committing Crow Purifiers or Dread Knight, I want value. I want to remove something important, swing momentum, or create scoring opportunities. Because once our low unit count starts disappearing, Terraform can get very difficult very quickly. So now we've talked about how I'd actually play the mission, let's talk about some of the biggest mistakes I see Grey Knights players make on Terraform. So in my opinion, these are some of the biggest mistakes Grey Knights players make on Terraform. First up is bad teleporting. Just because we can teleport somewhere doesn't mean we should. Grey Knights are amazing at movement, but if you teleport into a position where your opponent can just pick up a unit immediately, you're not being clever, you're donating points. And second, exposing Dread Knights. Honestly, I think this is probably one of the biggest mistakes. Dread Knights are pressure pieces. If they're standing in the open, turn 1, getting shot by your opponent's entire army, chances are something's gone wrong. Stage them, threaten with them, make your opponent respect them, but don't throw them away. Third, committing purifiers too early. I know we all want to send Crow and the boys straight into the middle and start purging, but for me, purifiers are usually a counterpunch piece or a shooting piece. If you throw them away too early, suddenly your pressure disappears and Terraform becomes really awkward. And finally, greedy charges. Sometimes with Grey Knights, the best play is actually just not charging. Stage safely, score points, Terraform, force your opponent to commit first, because on this mission, patience generally wins games. So overall, I actually think Terraform is a bit of a mixed one for the Grey Knights. We've got the movement and teleporting to play it well, but we're also a lower unit count army, and we don't love giving up key activations to do actions. For me, if we can Terraform early, I think we probably should. Get those points ticking over early, take pressure off later, and avoid needing expensive units to stop fighting just to score. Also, with Grey Knights, we can pressure the backfield if they leave us a gap and go for their home objective and terraform that because they can't terraform it back. But usually they're good at screening and we can never get there. But if we can, it's something to look for. Hopefully though you found this helpful, and if you did, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel. It generally helps out massively. Also, let me know what you thought of the video style and if there's anything you'd like to see improved for the next one. And until next time, brothers and sisters, stay strong, hold the line, and keep purging.